Welcome back to another edition of World Talks, where every word matters. With me, Anna Kalczyńska. Hello and good evening. Criticized, and rightly so, for forging even closer relations with Vladimir Putin, the Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico is clearly backed now by the Slovak nationalists. A delegation from the Slovak parliament is set to travel to Moscow next week. Representatives of Slovakia's ruling coalition want to, as they've called it, restore normal relations with Russia. Now, how popular is such an approach in the Slovak society, and what are the implications of Slovak domestic divisions for the European Union and NATO policies? To discuss this, I'm joined by Miroslav Wlachovský, former Slovakian Minister of Foreign Affairs and European Affairs. Good evening, sir. Good to have you.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation.
So, Robert Fico withdrew from public shortly after his visit to Moscow. Then he reappeared, or rather, was discovered by a team of investigative journalists in Hanoi. So, was it just a short vacation break, or is there more behind his disappearance?
I think it's very bizarre, both his trip to Moscow and then his disappearance. Because we learned about his trip to Moscow by an accident from Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, the Slovak public. He later announced that he spoke about it with the leadership of the European Union, probably with Madam President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and President of the European Council, Mr. Costa. But we were, as a Slovak public, we were not prepared for this meeting in Moscow, and Prime Minister informed about his talks with President Putin via Facebook, and then later on he reappeared on the Facebook from some kind of hotel room, and some Slovaks identified it as a room in a hotel Madame Butterfly in Hanoi.
Right. So has the Prime Minister's whereabouts been finally officially clarified? And what about his position he will take before talks in Brussels this Thursday? Are they known?
I don't know. Before he will go to Brussels, he should go to the Slovak Parliament and explain his trip both to Moscow and what he prepares for his talks in Brussels. That's how proper parliamentary democracy should work. But Mr. Fico clearly ignores some rules and procedures in recent weeks and months.
Right. Well, talks on securing gas supplies for Slovakia between Prime Minister Fico and the European Commission have been announced, as I said, for Thursday in Brussels. In his video, Fico broke silence with a statement in which he threatened to end support for Ukrainian refugees, among others. So is this a bluff? And why did Prime Minister Fico go so far as to threaten Ukraine?
I would say that it is a bluff, or it's definitely not something which is in a long-term interest of Slovakia. We want to have a good relations with all our neighbors, including Ukraine, which is in a very difficult situation vis-a-vis Russian aggression. And so far, Slovakia was quite helpful to our large neighbors, Ukraine. In the previous governments, we were very supportive. Prime Minister Fico, he talked at the beginning that he will end the military support, but he is not against the commercial military dealings with Ukraine. And he had a couple of meetings with Prime Minister Šmihal. But I think this role with President Zelensky, I have some doubts that it's sincere on the side of a Slovak Prime Minister. Obviously, the transport of gas was good for Slovakia, and it was a significant contribution to the coffers of the government. However, the situation has changed, and we were informed about it. It will change for 2 years, and I must remind people that after one of the meetings with Prime Minister Šmihel, he informed about this movement of Ukraine, even at the press conference with Prime Minister Fico. So he shouldn't be surprised by that act, but he behaved like he is surprised.
Exactly. All right. So, nevertheless, justice must be served. Prime Minister Fico is trying also to balance its foreign policy, forging a deal with the US, ordering Black Hawk helicopters for its Slovak army, while on the other hand, threatening Ukraine with outing of electricity as a retaliation method for cutting off gas transmission. So how to read these friendly gestures by Prime Minister Fico toward Russia and his willingness to get along with the European Union and NATO at the same time?
Well, Prime Minister Fico declared that he will do the foreign policy on all directions. But so far, I didn't see that much direction towards the West and towards our partners in the European Union. I saw a lot of goodwill towards Moscow, and when you listen to Prime Minister carefully, you recognize some of the Putin's rhetoric towards Ukraine and interpretation which are closer to Kremlin than to Brussels or Washington, and that's very warning, and I think in a way it is a bad policy for Slovakia, because his recent move towards Ukraine and his blackmailing, or I would say rather threatening that he will cut off electricity and he will cut off support for Ukrainian refugees, will be not taken well, not only by Ukrainians, but also by our Western friends. And I must say that when one look at the situation in Central Europe, I think Prime Minister Fico effectively worsened the relations with 3 out of 5 our neighbors. He worsened the relations with Czech Republic, due to his attitudes and communication. I would say also with Poland, and I would say definitely with Ukraine in the recent weeks.
Right, but could you please clarify to us the situation in the political situation in
Slovakia?
Right, because the Slovak parliament delegation is about to be heading to Moscow now. We hear that the party leader of the nationalists, Andrej Danko, who's become famous for his very pro-Russian statements, declared that he wants to open the eyes of the Slovak people for the situation in Russia, and he's going to pay such a fact-checking visit to Moscow. So, are such opinions as Danko's popular in Slovakia? What is the level of support for this way of policy?
I think the level of support of this kind of policy is a little bit less than the support for current government coalition, because I think some of the electorate is inclining to these kind of policies, and they support the Slovak National Party. They support party of Prime Minister Fico Smer, but also the right-wing party, which is outside of parliament, Republika. But I think it's not a majority of Slovaks. I doubt it very much. So they are appealing to their electorate or part of their radicalized electorate, but I don't think it's a majority of Slovakia's voters. And however crazy that sounds, I think one of the reasons why Prime Minister Fico went to Moscow was that he wanted to be there before Mr. Danko.
Amazing, indeed. Well, we read and we hear that have been demonstrations over the past week against the Slovak Prime Minister over his pro-Moscow stance, as well as his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin last month. So people had different slogans and different banners, flags, and various signs, some with the words "We are Europe" and treason. So in your view, is this the beginning of some larger movement or just one-off protest action? And so if you could please tell us what is the level and the current support for Smer and the nationalist coalition, and perhaps this is some kind of a beginning of an end for the Slovak Prime Minister and his government. Are we due for an election in Slovakia?
The Prime Minister has a very tiny majority in the Slovak Parliament. There are only four MPs more than he needed as a simple majority. And his governing coalition lost several votes in the Slovak Parliament because he has problems on a right wing of his government coalition, but also on the left side, or I would call it even more normal side. Some MPs from party Hlas, party of former chairman Pellegrini, who is now the president of the Slovak Republic, they disagree with several policies as they are present by current Prime Minister. So this is a very fragile situation. Plus, he has to consolidate the public finances, and it will have an impact on our wallets, and it is possible that people will get angry when they realize how big this impact is. So I think it is possible that Slovakia might face the pre-term election next year. It is one of the possibilities, and it's really higher than it was couple of months ago.
Yet Mr. Fico is a figure who is recurring. His comebacks are well known. So what are his prospects in your view? I mean, his strange disappearance, his using public funds must be infuriating for the society of Slovakia, right? How could his fate be forged right now?
I think we are facing different Robert Fico than in his previous three governments, because he was famous for fierce rhetoric, but he was also famous for his pragmatism and ability to make deals. This edition of Fico is for me a little bit irrational in his dealings, and I see less pragmatism when it comes to the interests of Slovakia. And it seems that his approach somehow narrowed to himself and the group of his political supporters. And his major goal is political survival and impunity.
Thank you very much, Miroslav Wlachovský. So the situation looks fragile, as you said, and we might face elections next year in Slovakia. Well, we see how that goes. Thank you very much for this interview and for your opinion and comments. And that concludes this edition of World Talk. Thank you very much for watching. Please stay with us here on TVP World as more news and more features are coming.